Just as a reminder, you can visit us at thepandapod.com. That's thepandapod.com to grab our RSS feed, listen directly, and share PandaPod with your family and friends. You can also reach us directly via email through podcast at thepandapod.com. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Panda Pod. I am Rab, and I'm joined, as usual, with my friends Wiggy
Hey!
and Jeff.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about something near and dear to my heart, and that's the Roman Empire. I guess Rome in general, maybe. Maybe we'll get into some Rome as a city stuff too. Who knows?
Man, who doesn't love Rome?
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm going to start off by asking you guys a question, and that is the one that's on everybody's mind. How often do you think about the Roman Empire?
All the time. Like, I really feel like I think about the Roman Empire every day at some point. If not, like, several times a week for sure.
If I don't think about the Roman Empire at least 3 times a day, I'm sleeping. Like, at least 3 times a day, at least.
Damn. I mean, that is significantly more than me. I think I usually think about it more often if I'm playing, Crusader Kings 3 or something like that. But day-to-day life, I mean, it's pretty rare, honestly.
That's interesting. I've talked to a few different people about this ever since this question went viral on TikTok. And the general consensus seems to be either you think about the Roman Empire on a daily basis and not even like a lot about it, just something about it. There's a Rome sink every day,
Right.
or you simply never think about it. Like the number of people I've talked to now who are like, I don't ever think about the Roman Empire. Why would I? And like my reaction is the same reaction as some of those guys on the TikTok videos. I'm like, what do you mean you never think about the Roman Empire? What are you talking
Right.
about? It was like a huge part of human history. And most of the people I'm talking to are white, so they probably had ancestors in the Roman Empire.
Sure. Normally, okay, so actually that's an interesting angle because if I'm thinking about history, like I do often think about how like events that are happening today, like go like where their roots came from in history. But usually I'm thinking about the period of World War II or like maybe stretching back to Napoleon.
Interesting. So your mind just never wanders back to those like the more ancient times. And maybe this has to do with my Christian upbringing too. Now that I'm really thinking about it, is like because Jesus was Rome, like the Roman
Sure.
period.
Well, if we were raised Chinese, we would be thinking about something different for sure.
Right. We'd be thinking about the Ming Dynasty or whatever at the time, or the Mongolian Empire. Was that around the same time as Rome?
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah, I don't know anything about timing. Time's not good for me.
The
Well,
Mongolian Empire, I mean, Genghis Khan, that was way later than the Roman Empire. I mean, that was like
yeah,
Byzantines were almost ready to fall at that point.
Gotcha.
yeah, that was definitely after. That was the flip side response to Jesus.
There were plenty
Like,
of Mongols though, that just not. I mean, I think Mongolian Empire is more like Genghis Khan's shit.
Yeah, I
yeah,
was thinking about Genghis Khan. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that was definitely later. Like the thing about I mean I'm with you too, Rev. Like I think about World War II a lot too, um, just because there's lots of strife in the world, right? And when you start to think about the history of strife, that's obviously the big one, right? That's like the most recent giant, big, terrible um, world war, right?
Right.
And it wasn't terribly long ago, like our grandparents were like
Right.
Sure.
Right.
in that age, right? Like, so it's not like it was, 6 generations down. Like, I never think about World War One. The only time I think
Right.
about World War One is when I'm thinking about World War Two, or we're having a conversation and like someone brings up Hitler. Like, I think about the history of Hitler and how he was in World War One. Like, that's the only time I think of World War One. Like,
Sure.
that's
Well,
it.
World War One's important for setting the context of World War Two. So
Right.
I feel like I need to stop us. We probably ought to do a World War Two episode at some point too.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
we're gonna
definitely
do a
will.
whole we're gonna do a whole series on World War II. Even if it's just me sitting here talking the entire time. We're gonna do on World War II.
Maybe that should be on your podcast.
Yeah,
You
Ooh,
know,
yeah,
yeah.
that
tell
definitely that
what's
definitely
the name
could
of your
be.
new podcast, Wigs?
My new podcast. I don't know. I'll have to. I don't remember.
You have
Edit
no
in the
idea.
name of the new
Okay.
podcast here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
well,
Jamie, bring up that.
yeah, Jamie. Yeah, look it up, Jamie.
Jamie, Google search a podcast that has never been released.
Yeah, I can't remember at the moment. So yes, I am coming out with a new podcast. But we'll talk about that later. I don't want to detract from our Rome. So, um, but I do think about Rome multiple times a day, and it's not always like I'm gonna sit here and think about Rome for 5 minutes.
Sure.
Usually it's like kind of like how you're talking about like a sink type thing.
hmm
Like I'm washing my hands and I'm like, oh, aqueducts. Like
Sure.
like that's how it is. It's not
Yes, plumbing.
yeah, it's like plumbing, or I think about how crappy our roads are and I'm like, man, why can't we just make good roads? Or um things like that, and especially with politics, like
Right.
that's the big one, right? Like that's I mean, we're effectively modeled after that, and so it definitely pops up there all the time in my head. But yeah, I mean, I think about this at least 3 times a day, if not more, at least in small bursts.
I've got a theory that um, the reason some people think about it a lot and other people don't, and this is, of course, a crackpot woo theory that I've got, is that it all has to do with like past lives. So the people that think about Rome a lot had like several past lives that took place in Rome, which I mean, that makes sense. It was this really
Right.
long period of time. A lot of people lived and died in the Roman Empire,
If that's the case, then I got stabbed at night in the alleyways at least 3 times.
I mean, that's probably true.
Yeah, I just kept getting stabbed because you weren't supposed to go out at night. So, but I like to be awake at night, so I've probably been stabbed a couple times in the streets.
I was talking to Elia about this question because she's the first person who asked me this question. I was like, on the toilet, coming back to the bath or to the bedroom, and she's like, "Hey, how often do you think about the Roman Empire?" And like, I casually walked in. I was like, I don't know, a couple times a day probably. And she started cracking up. I'm like, "What are you laughing about?" And she's like, "I'm watching these videos, and apparently that's a big thing." I'm like, "Yeah, of
Well,
course it is."
yeah, well, it's also a thing. It's a predominantly a guy thing too, right? Because for whatever reason, we're more prone to like history.
That's
I don't know.
interesting. Because I thought that was the case too, but then I talked to like several women who also said they think about it on like a daily basis too. My good friend Tiff, she thinks about it all the time. And I was like, well, what could be the reason for that? And that's where I really came up with the like past life idea, is that like maybe the reason some people think about it all the time is because part of them was Roman.
Right. And even on a like even if you want to take the past lives theory like into a totally scientific, place, you can I mean that it makes sense that the ghosts of people that were alive then still have effects over us. You know what I mean? Like the
Sure.
the echoes of their being, the way that they, had a huge effect on the world. Um, that still reverberates.
Yeah, and maybe it's even like the Assassin's Creed version of it, you know, where it's literally built into our DNA. These past lives that we lived, or whatever, our ancestors, their history somewhat is written into us.
That's what I
Right.
was about to say is there is, I mean, we know to at least some degree that genetic memories are real.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
we can't explain them, but there's a reason why, most people are afraid of the dark. There's a reason why um, you know, most of like we fear the boogeyman in the dark and we fear like large cats. Like we used to be hunted by large cats, right?
Right.
So, it's one of those things where, we're afraid of, lots of people are afraid of the ocean because it's such a force. I think we've talked about that before, about how afraid of the ocean I am.
Mm-hmm.
There's these things that are just ingrained in us and we can't explain them. Um, and so it wouldn't surprise me if, we have some memories handed down through our genetics. I mean, it also explains the rapid growth of technology over time, um, which is a crazy conspiracy of mine, which is
Mm-hmm.
that we don't necessarily have to relearn basics, in order to be able to expand our grasp on technology, right? Like, I don't know how to do any bushcraft, but I can use all of the technology available to me, right? Like, or I can help create things using technology, right?
Sure.
And I don't have to have those basic skills in order to do that. Um,
Sure.
but I like that idea.
I see a lot of Roman synchronicities lately, ever since like that question was first asked to me. You know, I'm seeing little things like I'll open up Chat GPT, okay, and like one of like example prompts has something to do with Rome. You know, little things like that. Like it's just I'm seeing it more and more.
Sure. Yeah, I got to keep an eye out, I guess. I mean, you said aqueducts. I literally remember thinking about aqueducts like less than a week ago. So, I mean, it's not like I never think about any of it. It's just I feel like I don't resonate with the multiple times a day answer. I would say like it feels to me like it's less than once a week.
I think there's a part of it that also has to do with um, your daily interactions with specific things too, right? Like,
Sure.
I mean, how much do you spend? I mean, how much time do you really spend paying crazy close attention to politics, or how
Right.
much how often are you like actually immersed in the things that are influenced by Rome,
Right.
and you wouldn't also just, maybe I'm weird and I just always constantly get these tiny things because I'm just like I'm driving down the road, like like
Sure.
maybe I'm the strange one, like
Well, clearly
so.
not.
Yeah,
Let's not
maybe.
jump to conclusions, Rab.
Well, we have
Yeah.
evidence from the internet meme that it's plenty of people. I
Oh,
would be
true.
curious if anyone's done a study yet. I would guess there has to be somebody who's at least done polls.
Mm-hmm.
So do we think the question's a psyop?
What do you mean?
So that question comes up and it becomes viral and people start realizing, how many people are thinking about Rome, and it, it's somebody or some group trying to make us aware of the things that are going on in the world right now that are very similar to things that have happened in the past in Rome.
Or what if it's just a psyop to get people to think about Rome? Like it's a viral marketing campaign by some fucking stupid movie that's going to come out about Rome in 3 years.
It's so funny. I just saw a um oh, never mind. I was gonna say I just saw a thing about Ridley Scott's new movie, but that's about Napoleon, not about Rome. Never mind.
Oh yeah, I want to see that movie real bad.
Yeah, it looks really good. I heard there's gonna be like a 4-hour director's cut that's released
Holy hell.
online. Like,
Oh,
yeah.
that's gonna be cool. Maybe it's like it's the Pope's marketing team. They're like, let's get on the TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't say the Roman Empire usually in the meme, right? It says Rome.
Yeah,
So
it
maybe
does
they just
say
maybe it's
Rome
the
Center.
tourism board of Rome. So, well, I mean, I was gonna take you guys through just a brief history of not I mean, a brief history of the Roman Empire done well would take more than this entire podcast. It would take 3 or 4 hours, but just literally some historical basis so we can kind of understand what types of periods we're talking about, right? And so, I mean, obviously there was the Roman Republic first, and that I don't have the dates of that pulled up in front of me right now, but that ended in 27 BC. Um, and so after that, um, there was a period of Julius Caesar's dynasty that was on the throne for really only like 40 years.
And that started with Octavian, right?
Correct. Yeah, and we can get back to specific emperors later, but I kind of just want to talk about like periods just so we can set some context, right?
Sure.
And that ended with Nero. Nero was the last of Caesar's dynasty to rule. Um, After that, there was some instability for a while. Um, there was a little bit less instability, and then eventually they had the five good emperors, which was 96 AD to 180 AD. And so obviously all of those guys, those five, ruled for a long time. And that includes Nerva, which is a rarely talked about emperor, but also some real famous ones like Trajan, Hadrian, Antonius Pius. I don't hear that guy talked about a lot. Marcus Aurelius is in here too. Those are the five good emperors. I guess he's Antoninus. Yeah, that's a hard name to say. And then that dynasty lasted until 192. And then they had another long period of instability. And the time during the five good emperors was actually Rome's like largest territorially. So that ends by 180 AD. And I mean, there were definitely periods of up after that, but never as far up as it was at that time. Um, and so after that, they had instability for a while. There's a really famous period called the Crisis of the Third Century that takes place 235 to 285 AD. And then eventually you get some more famous emperors like Diocletian in 284 AD. Um, and he kind of comes up with the idea of splitting Rome into multiple pieces because it was getting too big and too complicated to rule.
That was East and West, right?
Yeah, I mean, he actually divided into four territories, but they are actually, yeah, he divided into four territories. Yeah, but East and West is how it ended up shaking out in the long run. Most after his period, there wasn't really that system of four rulers. It kind of changed into two, and sometimes it would be just one. But after that is when Wikipedia starts listing whether they're west, east, or whole, right? Because there's so many of them. So eventually, though, they convert to Christianity. That's a big thing. And that happens around the 300s AD. Obviously, it happened differently in different places. And then, not too long after that, in most scholars say 476, the Western Roman Empire fell, and the Eastern Roman Empire continued on, until 1453 is when most people date that as ending. And I'm not going to cover the Eastern Roman Empire because that's too much.
That's fair. So, how long did the Roman Empire stand?
If you count, Okay, up until the Western Empire falls,
Mhm.
that would be let's see, 27 BC. So that's 28 years until zero, right? Plus 476. So just about 500 years, a little bit over.
Okay. Interesting. It's really not that long when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean it's not that long, but it's also, you know, 200 years longer than the U.S. has existed.
Right,
Well,
right.
yeah, the US is 247 now. It's 247 years old.
Yeah, so
So
twice as
so
long.
twice as long. The fall, like the real when that split happened is really when the beginning of the end. It still took a long time, right?
Right.
But that was kind of the beginning of the end. Um,
I do think it's worth pointing out because I feel like a lot of people think about, like, you'll hear people like say, "Oh, we're turning into the Roman Empire." You know, like we have all these things that are happening that are so similar to how the Roman Empire fell. We're gonna fall next too, but nobody ever talks about how like it's like 100 years it took for them to fall. Right? Like
Right.
really, you know.
yeah.
So we got
Well,
some
if you
time. It's not like tomorrow we're gonna collapse because gays are getting married. You know what I
right,
mean?
if you count the
Hold on
greatest
a
extent.
second. Hold on a second. That was a wild statement. I know you were
No,
being
but I mean
sarcastic.
that's like
I know
something
you
that
were
you
being
hear a
sarcastic.
Christian say, you know, something along the lines like, "Oh, we're just letting everyone get married to anything." You know, this is what the fall of the Roman Empire was caused by, was debauchery and doing whatever you want.
Sure.
I hate to say it, but I think they had more gay people in the beginning than the end.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
The Republic days were wild. Um, yeah. So what I was going to say about that, though, about the comparison and the time scale, I mean, if you count the time from their largest territorial expansion, that would be in 117 under Trajan. And now that 117 is the end of Trajan's rule, but let's just take that as the date, right? That's still, you know, 400 or 350 years, right?
Right.
That it took them to fully decline.
Yeah, and there was a lot of factors to that too,
Right.
right? One was they were still constantly being invaded by what they deemed was barbarians, right? Which is like Germanic tribes and uh, the Goths. Um, you know, they had when they split, the Eastern Empire was you know largely like Greek speaking, and they had better ties than the West did, and so they started just sapping all of the resources away from the West.
Right.
um, I mean, there's literally, I can speak on multiple things about why they fell, but it really did take a while.
Plague is a big factor too.
Yeah, plague. um they had and they also had an over reliance on slave labor. So when they got to their biggest point, right, so this entire time it's conquest, right,
Right.
so and we knew that they were big on slaves, and this wasn't just uh, because of like skin color or whatever. Like if they took
Sure.
you over, a majority of your population would become slaves, and it was really difficult for anybody to become an actual citizen. So
Right.
like most of your people are slaves at that point and forced into labor. Well, once they get to a place where they're so big and they stop their they're spreading because like Rav said earlier, it got really hard for them to manage,
Right.
right? So as they expanded to that point, they couldn't expand anymore. And because they had so many troubles governing. So they started to shrink. And since they weren't doing any more conquests, their slave labor population was slowly dying away. And so they had tons of economic problems
Right.
because they use slave laborers for everything. Because you don't want citizens to have to work because they're citizens, they're special,
Sure.
you know. So, there was also like, we were talking about over expansion. There was also tons of military over spending, essentially, right? Like because it costs so much money to maintain this giant empire.
Well, it's a good thing we
Um,
learned that mistake.
right, right, right. And it's just, and I think Christianity had a small part to play in it too, because so you go from the core of the government being um, all about Roman traditional values to a softer Christianity. And so like a lot of that's when a lot of the um like social networks started to come into place and things of that nature. So there's a lot more softening of the culture, which to some degrees was really really good. They did some really good things, but they didn't have the money because of the problems that they were experiencing to pay for things. so
Right.
so their economy just started officially just kept they just had economic problems for
Yeah, I want to talk about the transition to Christianity a little bit. I think it's pretty interesting. I mean, effectively, what you're saying about their expanding and that carrying the empire early on is totally true. And I think what happens when they hit their wall is that they start, and this is just not an intentional decision, but something they have to do, is start managing their internal affairs more effectively and getting um, like getting like expanding almost in a way internally though, right? And I see the conversion to Christianity as them adopting a technology essentially
Mhm.
to control the populace a little bit better.
Yeah, yeah, that very well could be. I mean, because back then, you start to this is the beginning of like this era is the beginning of like the Catholic faith becoming powerful, right? It's like this is when they are really spreading like they're spreading the faith and back then not everybody could read or write, right? So like a lot of the people that could really read and were like you could be the smartest person in your town could very potentially just be your priest.
Right.
So they have a lot of power, and so why not, you know, merge your government with your religion once again, like they had done before. So they've already done this in the past, where they merged their government and their religions together, and to make it more powerful and more stable. Um, and so I agree with you. I definitely think that's what happened. And I don't know whether or not, like you said, whether or not it was um a conscious decision, but I think it was probably a natural thing for them to do because they had already done that in the past.
Yeah. Well, supposedly Constantine saw a image when he was fighting a battle of crucifix and I think Jesus too in the sky. Um, Supposedly that's what happened. Now, I mean, I think that literally, like, if you can see the writings on the wall and you have to convert to Christianity to like keep the thing going, you're gonna see that image in the sky.
Right. Yeah. It's like a thirsty person in a desert. You're gonna see an oasis.
Right. Exactly.
When did it stop being the Roman Empire and become the Holy Roman Empire?
So the Holy Roman Empire is actually there was a long period of time where that didn't exist either. It was basically started by Charlemagne again. Charlemagne was he his reign was from 774 AD to 814 AD. So I would say it's pretty much indisputable that there was no Western Roman Empire at all from the years 476 and 774. Oh, and it says on here. Actually, sorry. It says on here he was emperor 800 BC. Or sorry, 80.
So he
So
had 17 years.
yeah, he was only emperor for 14 years of the Holy Roman, what could be considered the Holy Roman Emperor. And he did not call himself the Holy Roman Empire. He called himself the Emperor of the Romans. And then after he died, there was a lot of infighting between his sons, and I would say most scholars agree that there wasn't a Holy Roman Empire then either, and that it only came about um, in 962.
Interesting. So there's like a 400-year period there where basically the Roman Empire just didn't exist.
Correct. Yeah, it was. I mean, and this is an interesting fact too. When people bring like parallels to the U.S., um, a lot of people did still call themselves Romans, and they may have even paid like. I mean, I'm sure some people did. I'm sure there's way better records on this that people you could look into, right? But like they didn't. The people back then didn't be like, oh, the empire is gone. I better stop paying taxes to the emperor. I mean, they would continue like their rituals and stuff. Like the empire, like people were still claiming to be the emperor, and trying to continue that on, right? And that goes into like the Catholic Church collecting tithes and stuff too, right?
Mhm.
Not to mention that there would still have been, if I remember correctly, there still would have been some semblance of a senatorial government.
Correct.
Uh,
Rome continued to have a senate even after the empire fell.
right. So there was still a centralized government. There just was no emperor. And I mean, but like like Rab said, like there still may have been during different periods in time people who were acting as emperor. They just didn't have any big impact, so we don't really care about them, right? Like as far as history is concerned, right? Like um
Yeah. I mean,
so
historians agree they didn't rule. And even the last ones, like I mean, it's disputed exactly when the Western Roman Empire fell. The last, it's basically like a gradient. You know what I mean? Like it goes from they slowly start feudalizing, and what basically happened is that little like fiefdoms would get kind of like exceptions on their taxes essentially. They would realize that they could just produce everything internally and that they didn't need to pay taxes to Rome. They weren't getting anything out of the deal basically. And so that's kind of how feudalism developed, is that those realms started getting smaller and smaller, right? And that's how we have the transition into what we consider feudalism.
yeah, and so the I mean, talking since we're talking about the fall, I'll go ahead and start talking about it. So like Jeff has brought up before, there's people are talking a lot about parallels between the fall of the and it's been a while people have been talking about this, but all great empires fall at least to a degree. And the most recent power fall of an empire, we can talk about we talk about England, right? We talk about the United Kingdom.
Sure.
They were the most recent global power that no longer has the global power that they had before and are now restrained essentially to their own land, right? Like they still carry some political power, and still have good connections to other places in the world, but they're not they don't own, like, they don't own places anymore. They kind of stopped that empire building, right? And fell back. And so and so the lessons that can be learned from this, right? So the first thing is invasions, right? Um, so if we so Rome had invasions by barbarian tribes. If we want to equate something like this to what the United States go through, not so much. We're never really invaded. However, we are constantly in some small to medium scale war, right?
Right.
Somewhere. So we are still constantly fighting, and that taxes our resources. Um, Economic troubles and over reliance on slave labor was something that the Romans had a problem with. So we don't necessarily have an over reliance on slave labor. However,
Hard disagree.
well, let me finish. You could say that our current well, there's three aspects to that, right? So now that we're in a global economy, the companies that we have do run using slave labor in other parts of the world.
Right.
That's something we can say. The
There's more
second thing that
slaves now than there were during the
ever,
Civil War.
well, yeah, yeah. Well, there's no more slaves now than there were ever.
Right.
I mean, that's just how it is. But secondly, its own people. The gap is increasing because of the economic troubles. So, are the people on the lowest end of the totem pole are almost essentially slaves at this point
Yeah,
because
that was going to be my point.
there's no way it's outside of winning the lottery or getting some kind of fallout monetary win. There's no way for them to get out of where they are, just because that's how the system's been put in place. Our economic troubles are have been made extremely apparent ever since the pandemic, if not before then. And so we're definitely overspending on a lot of things. We're definitely not using resources the way that we should be reusing resources, etc. Um, we don't have to deal with what's necessarily like a split off and like the rise of the Eastern Empire, which is what they had to contend with.
Well, you never know. There's always Gavin Newsom.
I was going to say, I think the Republicans got something to say about that.
Yeah, sure, yeah, sure. But we are politically split at the moment,
Sure.
and now that we're in a global economy, which Rome you could say that they were slightly in a global economy for what was the known world at the time, right? You could
Yeah.
say that they were a global economy, um, but our competition has banded together, and they are now causing massive problems, right? And this being Russia, China, India, Iran, um, everybody that's in that pact that Russia created, right?
Well,
So
I think you're talking about BRICS, and that does include now Saudi Arabia, which definitely is not against the United States.
right, but they are because the
Sure.
entire idea of BRICS is to use a different currency. So
Right.
they're attacking our currency. So this is a problem. Um, the next is overexpansion and military spending, overspending. Now we don't have overexpansion in the sense of taking over territory and having to manage large swaths of territory. However, we are funding other governments
Well,
because they can't fund themselves, and our military is like we've said before, 3 to 4 times the size of the next three in line combined, and they're our allies.
sure. I mean, it's also conceptually kind of the same thing because I mean, like I guess the Romans, the way that I think it is worth taking a pause here and talking about like how did they conquer territory? Because like they basically um, wanted the cities to pay tax to Rome, the city. That was what they conquered territory to do. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes they would build cities, like in England, but they would basically try to get tax money flowing back to the one place.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so eventually those places get poorer over time.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I guess what I'd like to say is basically like that we don't conquer territory. The United States does not conquer territory. I mean, obviously there's exceptions to that too. I mean, we did
sure.
conquer a whole lot of territory 100 or more years ago, right? But the we don't today conquer territory, but we still take profit back from other countries to the US. And if you can guarantee a system, or like a system for at least one country, where you're always going to get somebody US friendly in charge, I mean, effectively, what is the difference between
You
like
right.
those two things?
Right, and so what we do, and this is actually what we're doing in Ukraine right now, and most people don't know about this, and they don't think about it, and it's never talked about on media, which is when we go to a place like this. And so when it talks about all this money that we're like providing to Ukraine, right? First off, the thing that we need to realize is first, this all of this money is technically a loan. It's all technically a loan. Okay. Now, whether or not we ever see that money back is a completely different story. But this is what we've done over and over again. We give them a loan to give them military aid, and then they have to pay us back over time. So it's in our best interest to make sure that they win. That's how we do that. So we're essentially doing the same thing that you were talking about before. We're making them indebted to us, and then they have to pay us. So we're not attacking them. We're doing it in a more quote unquote friendly way, but we're still using our power over them to make sure that they continuously pay us money.
Right. I mean, well, there's literally giving money, as in like forcing like the government to government loans, but there's also the fact that like let's say that Russia capitulated tomorrow and Ukraine got to take maximal victory, like take Crimea back, all that stuff. I mean, U.S. companies would get to come in and rebuild the war-torn parts. The
Yep.
contracts would go to U.S. I mean, the profits would go home. I mean, if they have their way, at least. I mean, it's not obviously that's not guaranteed to happen, but that's what the goal is.
Yeah, and the other thing to think about it is these countries that we do this with, like when we did it with Iraq and like with like in Afghanistan, the idea is to make sure that there's a complete victory after we technically loan them money, and then we pay our own contractors to go in there and and fix the place up again. So this is all money being spent from us. Like even those profits don't come from the other country because they have no money. So who's paying these contractors to go in and fix this stuff? There are no more rich people in that country. Like,
Right. Well, and
so
and, and so like if I mean, literally private military companies step in to like run mines and stuff and keep
oh
shipping
yeah,
goods back to us.
yeah, 100%. 100%. And then just general military overspending, which I already hinted on before, right? We're spending so much money in our military, and to a degree, it's always good because we feel safer because we're spending all this money. But however, there's also a practicality argument, right? Like we really are spending too much money. The next thing is government corruption and political instability. So as you were going through that history, right? Like how many different uh, tumultuous times did Rome have to go through because people couldn't figure out who was going to rule?
Right.
Right? There's people people would get stabbed in the streets all the time, and they were corrupt, right? They were like the senators were just fully corrupt. They would use money, threats of violence, and like sexual deviance cases against people, in order to maintain control. So they would like they were so corrupt by the time that they started, and go ahead and put the Catholics in there too, right? Like mixing religion and the government together, and the money that just flowed back and forth, and all of these shenanigans, right? Like they're just so corrupt, and that's what's going on now. There our corporations have complete control over our government through money and corruption by politicians, and there's instability because nobody can agree on um how to rule the country. And our government, but not only our government but also our laws have gotten so complicated over time that it's getting harder and harder for the government to manage the country. um like the basic things that we have don't get taken care of, right? Our infrastructure alone is just getting run down because we haven't done anything to it on a massive scale since maybe 20 years after World War II.
Sure, and it mirrors uh, the decline into feudalism. Um, where essentially the question being asked was what am I paying taxes for?
Right. And back to your point of like you were talking about the about Christianity coming in, right? And that being a small part of it and contributing to lots of different factors, including political instability. Now, we don't have a religion per se that's coming in and taking over another religion. What we have is essentially a loss of because we don't like to have, some people like to have their religion in the government, other people don't like to have their religion in the government, and that's kind of always how it's been. But there has been a loss of traditional values over time. Now, I'm not saying that whether or not this is a good or bad thing ultimately. However, there has been a shift from structured religion to um, opinions of masses, right? And a more uh, moral ambiguity, and it's hard to explain, but there's more atheists now than there are people who are religious, and religion comes with stability. So uh, we have a transition from religion to non-religion. And like I said before, whether or not this is a good or bad thing, I mean, we'll see that with time. But it is creating instability, because we did have what are quote unquote more traditional values that are being changed. It's a period of transition. Um, and then yeah, so those are the things. That's like 6 out of the 8 things that caused the fall of Rome, and those are things that are happening to us now, just in slightly different ways. So when people say, oh well, this is what happened to Rome, yeah, this is what happened to Rome. And if we're not careful, we're because we're already having problems. So if we're not careful and we don't realign, we're in for the big trouble in the long haul. Um, I don't
Sure.
I don't envy my kid having to live through the fall of the American Empire. Like,
I don't
Yeah.
know.
that's
I don't mourn the death of the American Empire because I don't think that's not fair. Maybe I'll mourn it, but like I don't find the idea of it shocking or scary because I mean every empire ends eventually, right? Like
sure, but
it's
there is
ridiculous to think that we're just going to keep going forever,
oh
you
sure, I
know?
know we're not going to go forever, but there is no like so Britain has literally been, I mean, I guess you could say Rome, I guess. Like it's still there. But it's more difficult to get a soft landing than something catastrophic happening. And even during a soft landing, there's still a lot of hurt for
Right.
the people of that country. And so there's only like two ways out of it, right? Like either our government and our people get on the same page and start doing what they have to do to make sure that things continue over time and that there's no degradation in the foundations, or we have to eliminate all boundaries through the world so that we're all one people. Like those are really the only two options that create stability for the people who are already here in the United States.
Sure. I think it's worth talking what would we actually do to prevent it? Because I mean, you ended your stuff saying like, if we're not careful, but I mean, obviously, there's nothing that the three of us can do. But if you even just talk about like what could the government do, I think that shooting for England as a model would be the way to go. I mean, that
Yeah.
is the off ramp, in my opinion. Is like you have some other. I mean, basically, what happened to England is that at the end of World War II, we took them apart and we stripped them for pieces, basically. And so, like that,
Well, they
having
were
that
already
happen.
destroyed
Sorry.
by the time they were already mostly destroyed by the time that we entered the fight. Like they had already bombed London into damn near ashes
Sure.
by the time that we joined.
and
Like,
and obviously like the US coming in probably had something to do with them wanting to take stuff off of England. They probably waited, and they
for sure.
also I mean and like England would have lost control of India regardless of London getting bombed. But
Right.
what I'm trying to say is that in the peace conferences for World War II, essentially what happened is that the UK did not hand over everything to the United States, but it was like kind of like handing over management.
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because that was the exact same time at the end of World War II when the dollar became the new global standard. Um, but we were also the most powerful military at the time. And it all kind of ties into who gets the money standard, right? There's military power, there's amount of money, and there's some other factors as well, but
Sure.
as far as the most stable and reliable, right? But that was our rise to power. We were poor as all fucks before World War II. Like World War II is what created our economy. So if you know, I understand what you're saying. Like yes, I do see that handover of power and authority. And yeah, they do still disagree with us sometimes, but we usually get our way. Um, and yeah,
Right.
but
I mean,
I'm sure
I
the
guess
Greeks helped too.
yeah, sure. I guess what I'm trying to say is the way the best way off for us is to kind of try to stand down. Like we have so many military bases overseas, like we could start dismantling those. And then I mean eventually um the like somebody would have to kind of like step up to either become the next empire or like you said maybe at that point everybody's ready for countries to just completely dissolve and we can be one world.
Yeah, what I would hope for is exactly what you're saying. We slowly start to get rid of our military influence in the rest of the world, other than literally maybe bases as close to the like our most three dangerous opponents, right? Like other than like those very specific places, we remove our bases and we start spending less and less in each year on our defense until we get down to half of what we're spending now. Right. So like over like a 15 to 20 year period, reduce our money that we have going in um, into that into defense and into expansion of military. That's the first thing that has to be done.
Right.
And we've got to stop policing the world, and we've got to start letting people fight their own battles. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem saying it, and I said it when it happened. Like, you know, why are we in the middle of a battle between two allies of the Soviet Union? Like why are we even in that battle?
Sure.
We're halfway across the world, and we don't even get anything from them anyway. Like it's not, and this isn't me being like trying to be callous or anything like that. It's just a matter of I don't understand what our interest is other than a humanitarian interest. But even at a humanitarian interest, we're the only country that gives a shit. So, like, why are we still trying to stand on a moral high ground when we do things like bomb weddings in Iraq?
Sure.
Like, 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 like we're not walking the walk that we say that we're talking, right? Like,
Certainly.
so I don't get it. Like, I just don't get it. We don't need to be all over the world, especially if we're not going to do any good. Like,
Right.
there's no good that comes from it.
Right. I
That's
think that it does um like bring money back home in some way, or else it wouldn't be done. That's I really don't think we're losing money on the whole thing. I think that, if we were losing money, we would pull out already.
Well, the thing that I'll say about that is, so you know how like during the pandemic the government printed a whole bunch of money in order to like
Sure.
fund stuff, right? Every time we give money in the billions to Ukraine, that money's being printed.
Sure.
They're creating more inflation
Right. Of course. Yeah.
just because we're funding them. And where does that money go? That money
Certainly.
goes to our defense contractors.
Right. I wasn't trying to argue that the American people have seen a benefit from the war in Ukraine. I was mostly just trying to say that, like, at the very least, like maybe up until 10 years ago, like the places we invade, it was to make a profit, and
Sure.
they were largely successful at that. And maybe now that started to break down.
Yeah, I think it's been starting to break down ever since Vietnam,
Sure.
right? And the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was what was that operation? Um, right before Kennedy got assassinated, right when he got into office.
Well, there
There
was
was
the Bay of Pigs. Is that
yeah,
what you're
Bay of
referring
Pigs.
to? Yeah.
Yeah, Bay of Pigs. Like we keep trying to do this stuff and go into places where we really shouldn't be just because there's some there's some resource or there's something like that that we can grab by proxy. And I don't know. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's starting to break down, and we have to realize we can't keep doing that anymore because it doesn't work.
Sure.
Rab, I like what you said earlier about how, like, if we start to stand down, like that made me think about, like, maybe empires, instead of having to be like murdered as they often end up being, maybe like a retirement for empires is the like end goal. Because I do think about England, and I look at where they are right now, and they're doing all right. you know like, I know they got the whole like EU Brexit thing, and they have economic troubles like everybody else, but like, they're doing okay. I think people in England are happy for the
Yeah.
most part. Maybe that's not like the terrible plan. Maybe we need to start writing our will, if you will.
Sure.
Who's getting what, and via that parsing out of our responsibilities, we can just become just a really nice comfy little country.
Yeah, and I think the best way to do that outside of like receding our military, like we talked about before, is just becoming more reliant on the people and the resources that we already have in the country. Like COVID made it very very obvious that we can't keep depending on China for stuff because we had shortages of everything. And it's because almost everything that we use is being made in China using, like we talked about before, like slave labor um, and people being paid a penny on the dollar, if not half a penny on the dollar. Like we have the ability to, and this is how we became great in the first place, which was utilizing our own people and our own ingenuity to create an economy that was worth something by itself. And right now, the only thing we're good for is our credit system. And I think we really need to reevaluate that stance. I'm not saying that we need to be like toot the horn and play the drums like nationalist. I don't think we need that. But we can responsibly and reliably change direction on some of these things to create a more stable country
Yeah.
that can and will be able to actually get that soft landing. Like you're talking about, Jeff, like a retirement plan. Like let's get our ducks in a row so that when everything falls out, we don't have food shortages. We don't
Sure.
have we don't have drug shortages. We don't have these problems that we had before. And these are all things that we could do in the country because we did them until we went international during the Clinton era. And so this is definitely some things that we can do. We've proven we can do it.
Right.
I think
And
Well,
a great place to start with that is like a great example to set is for the people in Congress who are just too old to be serving retiring. Set the example for the whole country.
right.
Just retire. It's okay. The
yeah,
country's going to have to do it eventually. You can do it too.
yeah, it's okay not to serve until you die, and even before that point, make sure that all your private affairs are being taken over by your children. Dianne Feinstein.
Yeah.
Um, you don't have to serve until you die. If you
Yeah.
are no longer mentally capable, it's okay to admit that, and it's okay to stop and enjoy your life with your family and friends. It's
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, with the
Like,
case of Dianne Feinstein, it's literally like once you're at the point where you're starting to lose mental capability, it's too late to retire because
Right.
there's basically everybody around you is just going to want to keep you in power. I'm
yeah,
sure
yeah.
Biden's
I
in the
mean, they
same
don't want
boat.
to lose. Yeah, they
Oh
don't want
yeah.
to lose their jobs. There's people that work for you, and if you quit, they lose their jobs.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is another problem, right? Like those people should move on to the next person, right? And like I don't that's a whole nother thing. But it's okay to retire. Like Jeff's
Yeah.
saying, it's perfectly okay. We support you.
Do it
And
before it's too late.
Yeah. And it's okay to like lose the mentality of the hustle, like everything doesn't have to be bigger and better and you don't have to be a part of changing everything, like it's okay at some point in time to just sit back and not work and relax, and enjoy the fruits of the labor that you put in. Let the younger generation do their thing and get back and enjoy your retirement because you're not serving us anymore.
yeah, you think you're still serving, but you're not doing anything any good. And the reasons why, yeah, I would hope the reasons why, even if you think you're still doing it and you think you're doing good, is like altruistic and you think you're doing a good job, and it's not because other people are telling you no, you can't do this because we need you. Because I'm going to be completely 100% honest with you, we don't anymore. Um, like you've done a good job. Thank you for your service. Please go enjoy Christmas with your grandchildren
Yeah,
and
and
your
this
great
is
grandchildren because you're 75 years old and you probably have great grandchildren. Like, go life.
and this is definitely true for Supreme Court justices as well. please retire. Don't die while someone you don't want in power has the ability to replace you. You know.
Yeah, I mean, we have differing opinions all around the country, and we need to hear those voices. And you stifling them because you, I mean, and this goes for both parties. This is not a single party issue. This is
No, of
a
course not.
this is an entire governmental issue, and you need to go on.
Well,
We'll
and private life too. I mean, CEOs and stuff too. I'm sure it extends there as well.
Right.
Yeah, sure. Like, we're living longer and longer, and the age of living longer and longer has increased by multiple factors in the past 50 years. And so this is a new era of people living longer than they're supposed to anyway. And so I think we're just now seeing the impacts of people living too long. Um,
Well, the
and
impact is that life expectancy has started to shrink.
well, that's actually pretty good. Uh, because I don't know, I'm one of those people where I don't want to live to be that old.
Sure.
I just don't like. I want to enjoy my life. I don't want to live until I'm infirm, and the last 2 to 3 years of your life are just sitting in a chair, hopefully hoping that somebody feeds you and changes your diaper. Like that doesn't sound like a good way to go to me, but that's my opinion.
I don't want to ever become that dependent on other people, but I do want to live to be very old, and I
Sure.
think that we're approaching that like on a technological standpoint, like from that angle, we're getting to a point where that's going to be true, that we're going to start living a lot longer. But I don't know, that's going to change all these things, but that hasn't happened yet. So it's okay to retire right now. It's
Yep.
okay. You can do it. We support you.
Yeah, let us live forever. You don't need to. You don't
Seems
need to,
legit.
but you can let us do it. Right.
All right. And if
For
you don't
sure.
live forever, we'll create a chat bot out of all of the text messages you ever sent anyway. It's okay. Like you'll still be around in some way.
It's very
Misspellings
true.
and all. Yeah, typos, all caps will keep your spirit alive.
Yeah, I mean, I could probably go on discussing this stuff for hours, but we'll have
Oh
to
yeah,
come back to it
absolutely.
at some point.
Yeah, we'll do a part two on Rome.
I mean, how much of this is really about Rome? I think we got about 25, 30 minutes of Rome and then a solid good rant about the US.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
I think that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll do
But I
it
mean,
on.
isn't that the whole point though, right? That's why we think about Rome. It's
right, right.
because it's so relevant to what's going on here now.
Ooh, and I have
Yeah,
one final point. It's interesting to me that everybody talks about comparing the fall of the US to the fall of the Roman Empire and not the fall of the Roman Republic. Like during Trump, people were talking more about the fall of the Roman Republic, at least in my opinion. And like now it seems like people have largely moved on and are truly recognizing that we're not in a fall of the Republic moment. That happened a long time ago.
Ah, so the
well,
Republic has already fallen.
Well, yeah, and the Republic fell in Rome with Julius Caesar, right? Like back when Trump was around, people talked a lot. They compared our days a lot to the days of Julius Caesar. With
Mhm.
somebody seizing power and all that stuff, right? But I mean, in my opinion, like that moment happened a long time ago, and I think it shows with the fact that people now talk about the fall of the Roman Empire.
It's interesting. It's like
I'm gonna be
culturally we've moved on, or as a unit we've moved on to this new concept.
I'm
Right?
gonna
People
be complete.
understand the U.S. as an empire today.
Right.
I'm gonna be honest. I think it was the moment that we joined the global. The moment the United States started shifting from and like having our workforce be here and our workforce being elsewhere is when that shift started.
Sure.
Because that's when the corporations gained a lot of power and gained a lot of money and really started taking control over our government. And I think that that's probably the silent killer. Um, it wasn't so silent at the time. Not everybody agreed with the actions that took place. However, I think the things that are loud, even when Obama was in office, the Republicans were like, he's not going to give up power and blah blah blah, and then the left was all worried about Trump not giving up power, and um, I think if we do want to consider the end of the Republic, like this is like a Big Bang, like ending of the Republic, the only thing that happens is somebody takes over the country. Like there's a military coup, and the military takes over the country. That's the only like other change that we can go through.
Sure.
Um,
And it's not
so
out of the question, but I feel like that has to be another episode.
yeah, that would be
for sure.
a completely other episode for sure.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for listening. Be sure to join our Discord. Be sure to give us 5 stars on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And whoever already did that, I love you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, you're the best.
And yeah, thanks for hanging out.